Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're tackling a massive, systemic misconception in the world of information security. See, so many organizations truly believe that if they just buy the right next-gen firewalls, deploy the absolute latest endpoint protection, and drop millions on security software, they're secure. But we are going to move way beyond just buying security tools today. We're looking at the structural and operational principles that actually make those tools work. And, more importantly, what happens when pure convenience overrides those exact principles.
It's a provocative question, isn't it? Why do companies with cutting-edge security tools still get breached? I mean, you look at major incidents in the news, and very often the breached organization had a massive security budget. They had all the right technology on paper, but as we'll see, having the tools and having the correct governing logic for how to actually use them, those are two very, very different things.
Okay, let's dive into this. Consider this real-world case study involving a rapidly growing financial processor called NovaPay. They had modern technology across the board, yet they allowed their software developers to hold permanent, elevated privileges on live production payment servers. Why in the world would they do that? Well, management justified it as being necessary for rapid incident response. Now, this is the ultimate convenience trap. They essentially traded fundamental security for operational speed, completely undermining every expensive tool they had in place.
To fix this kind of thinking, here's our roadmap for the explainer. First, we'll hit the NovaPay convenience trap. Second, structural security principles. Third, managing insider risk. Fourth, operational principles. And finally, principles over tools.
Starting right off with Section 1, the NovaPay convenience trap.
So, during an internal review, NovaPay's head of IT actually told regulators, "We have all the tools. Everything is protected." This perfectly captures what we call tool thinking. It's this completely false belief that security is just an inventory of software. But look, security isn't just about what you buy, it's about how you think. Model thinking relies on understanding 16 foundational security principles. These principles aren't the controls themselves, they're the governing logic that dictates exactly how controls are conceived, structured, and applied across your whole organization.
Let's move into Section 2, Structural Security Principles.
And this brilliantly illustrates the distinction we really need to make here. We can neatly divide our 16 principles into two categories. Structural principles govern how a system is actually built from the ground up. Think of this like installing airbags in a car right on the manufacturing line. It's baked into the architecture. Operational principles, on the other hand, govern how that securely designed system is maintained and run. That's more like closing the watertight doors on a submarine when you've got a leak. You absolutely need both to survive.
Let's look at one of the absolute most critical structural principles: security by design. This just means integrating protection into every single phase of the system lifecycle, right from architecture all the way to deployment. It's inherently more reliable. Conversely, security by afterthought, trying to frantically bolt on safeguards after the system is already built, is almost always reactive, way more expensive, and structurally weak.
Another vital structural principle is fail-safe defaults, or default deny. Think of a standard firewall. Ports should be completely blocked by default, and you only grant permissions when it is explicitly justified. Basically, whatever isn't expressly permitted must be forbidden. This is absolutely crucial to ensure that unconfigured or forgotten components don't accidentally turn into wide-open entry points for an attacker.
Just to rapid-fire round out the structural side, we have a few other core mandates. First, you must know the system, because honestly, you can't protect what you don't understand. Defense in depth means having multiple independent layers, so if one fails, another holds the line. Then there's least privilege, which, as we saw, NovaPay explicitly violated. Need to know restricts access based purely on strict business necessity. And finally, least common mechanism minimizes shared components to prevent those devastating single points of failure.
Which brings us to Section 3, TPS-RSR, Managing Insider Risk.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is TPS-RSR isn't just some unpronounceable alphabet soup. It's practically a cure for unchecked power. It stands for transparency, partitioning, separation of duties, rotation, supervision, and review. This model isn't effective just because it naturally assumes your employees are malicious. Not at all. It's effective because it systematically limits concentrated authority. It reduces the likelihood of human error or unchecked abuse taking down the whole ship.
Let's ground this right back in NovaPay's reality with what we can call the single engineer problem. NovaPay had exactly one senior network engineer managing all firewall changes without any peer review whatsoever. She even approved her own change requests. Management defended this setup by saying, Well, she has an 11-year unblemished record. They trusted her. But here's the reality check. Insider risk is an organizational design problem. It is not a trust problem. Without the separation component of TPSSR, a single mistake by that engineer, or just a single compromise of her account, could instantly bypass all of NovaPay's incredibly expensive security tools.
Let's pivot to Section 4, Operational Security Principles. The major mindset shift here starts with assume breach. Actually, you have to operate under the assumption that a security breach has already occurred or inevitably will tomorrow. You're shifting from purely trying to prevent attacks at the perimeter to continuously monitoring, detecting, and containing them internally. Going right back to our submarine analogy from earlier, if a breach happens, you want to slam shut those watertight doors immediately to limit the blast radius so the entire vessel doesn't wind up at the bottom of the ocean.
Next, you must minimize the attack surface. Practically speaking, this means if you don't need it, disable it. Close down unnecessary services, disable unused ports, rip out redundant APIs. Every single open port or active background process is a potential shiny new entry point for an attacker. The smaller your surface, the harder you are to hit. Simple as that.
Then we have secure by default. Systems should be delivered in their absolute most secure configuration right out of the box. Users shouldn't have to go digging through settings to manually enable protection. This means strong passwords are required on day one, insecure protocols are disabled by default, and admin privileges are highly restricted from the get-go. Deliberate action should only ever be required to reduce security for a specific, justified business need, never to enable it.
And, of course, keep systems updated. I know, it sounds basic, but this isn't just about clicking update once in a while. It's a relentless, continuous, operational discipline. A system with ignored patches is literally like a house falling apart. It practically rolls out the red carpet to invite attackers inside.
Rounding out these operational principles, you've got to mandate encryption everywhere, totally avoid the false comfort of security through obscurity, ensure constant awareness and training, and remember one critical rule. Prevention is ideal for sure, but detection is an absolute must. At NovaPay, their monitoring platform generated so many alerts that analysts literally couldn't keep up, meaning real, critical threats were just getting buried in the noise. Remember the Colonial Pipeline attack? The compromised VPN account just sat there dormant. If you can't detect an attacker, their dwell time, the time they're quietly hidden inside your network, skyrockets. And dwell time carries a massive, truly catastrophic cost.
Let's wrap things up with Section 5, Principles over Security Tools.
So, the crucial point is really this. Buying endless tools is just an illusion of security if you don't have the foundation. To truly escape the convenience trap that ensnared NovaPay, organizations have to realize that these 16 security principles are what actually translate high-level governance intent into day-to-day operational behavior. Without principles like least privilege and separation of duties, honestly, even the most expensive next-generation firewall is practically useless.
Which leaves us with this final, pretty heavy thought to consider about your own workplace. Your organization might have all the right tools on paper, but does it have the right principles in practice? Are you guys relying on tool thinking, or are you finally ready to embrace model thinking? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this gives you a powerful new lens for looking at information security.